So small, medium, large, or extra large? Why are we defined by such a short range of sizes if we are so plural? If fashion is about expressive identities, why do we keep being reduced to improbable standards? Hello, I'm Lívia Pineng, and I will be your host and moderator today. Welcome to the Digital Design and Sustainable Futures Decising, a webinar by the Digital Fashion Group. I'm here with this amazing panel of women, celebrated a recent International Women's Day on March 8th, and excited to hear their thoughts on how digital fashion can contribute to a more inclusive fashion system through sizing. Hello, ladies. It's so nice to have you here. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for sharing your knowledge with our community. So let me introduce you quickly. From Amsterdam, we have Muchaneta Kapfund, editor and CEO of Fashion Nerd. Good evening, Muchaneta.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm really interested to hear what the ladies have to say here today.
Great. And from New York, we have Nicole Reader, CEO and founder of Modern Mirror. Good morning, Nicole.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. I've been really looking forward to having an amazing discussion with these ladies.
And from San Francisco, even early in the morning, hello, Virgie Tovar. Virgie is a body positive activist, author, and contributor at Forbes. Hi, Virgie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So this webinar is part of a series dedicated to sustainability and digitalization through the fashion supply chain. In the first session, we talked about the sustainable development goals in the fashion industry. You can watch it on our website, the digitalfashionGroup.academy, and it's available on our webinar library for free. So remembering that you in the audience can participate in this webinar through the polls during the session. They will appear on your screen. The same for the panelists. You can also answer to the questions, but you will be speaking. So I will let to the audience to do that. So, and then you can send the participants, please, you can send the questions to our panelists using the Q&A tool. We will have 15 minutes at the end of the session dedicated to this. So let's go. Let's discover why size matters when we are talking about digital fashion and sustainability. So I will start with a question to Virgie. According to a study published in 2016 and mentioned by Forbes recently, the average size of the American woman has increased from size 14 to 18. The study suggests that the body type promoted by brands from marketing and technical design perspectives is outdated. So Virgie, which are the steps the fashion industry should take into developing a more inclusive production? Perhaps a better understanding of the consumer bodies by the designers when they are designing, or the knowledge of the body positivism and its impacts in the economy. Where should we start?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, to begin with, I think we need to start with recognizing and letting it really sort of settle in that in the United States, and certainly I know in the UK, 70% of women are plus size. So I think that it's really hard to actually accept this when we think about how structures, not just fashion, but beyond, are really created. And they're really created to sort of serve what is in fact the minority body size. So I think to begin with, that recognition is really important. And then to sort of go from there, really, I'm thinking about some incredible leaders in the space. For example, Gap Inc. Has begun through Old Navy and through their athletic wear brand, Athleta, to sort of go in and do the market research on what their plus size consumer is doing, because there's a little bit of a feedback loop problem where, brands will maybe recognize that 70% of women are plus size, but then they're like, well, we have no market data. Well, these women don't buy clothing. Well, these women don't come back. And I mean, the problem is, right, again, the feedback loop, this is not considered a desirable or a legitimate consumer, like we are not. And then so for example, a brand might launch an extended line or, might launch a plus size brand, not tell anyone, and then it doesn't do well. And then that becomes sort of the data, right? But what needs to happen, right, is like what Gap Inc., and I'm going to specifically talk about Athleta, is doing. They went in and they actually researched what their plus size customers were doing. And they found that their plus size customer was spending 90% more and was returning twice as frequently to their stores. So, I think right, they had a mission, they wanted to course correct on their ideas about body size and check their own bias. But I think they also wanted to go in and say, like, is the model that we have even working from a financial standpoint? And I think the pandemic pushed a lot of brands to have that question internally, or to sort of deal with that question internally. So anyway, they were like, okay, we've got a mandate, right? We've got this very active consumer. We are going to course correct. So they immediately they brought on someone with a background in plus size sizing. Sizing is challenging as you sort of scale up. And we know that plus size, fashion is not really taught in fashion school. It's very difficult to sort of get that education when you're in fashion school. So anyway, they found somebody who had a really amazing track record at other companies that have a more historic relationship to the plus size consumer. They hired her, and then they went in and they started doing, they got implicit bias training for their entire C-suite. So they invested in learning about size bias and checking their own size bias at the top level, the sort of the leadership level. And then they invested in creating a body positive language program that every single employee on the floor, so all 500 of their associates on the ground who are selling these clothing to consumers, they all got training in how to talk about sizing in a way that would not offend and not perpetuate size bias. And the last thing I'm going to share on this, I have so many ideas, but I think, right, we fundamentally need to change how we think of plus size customers. There is this belief, the prevailing belief in fashion is that she does not want to be plus size. She does not want to invest in a wardrobe. She will not do any of this because she is always trying to become thin, right? And first of all, right, like we're looking at a cultural shift where even if that was a percentage of the consumer, that is increasingly, getting smaller with the rise of body positivity. I think more and more people are realizing the research on this issue, which is that fundamentally, if you are a higher weight person, there is no research that substantiates your ability long-term on a grand scale, the population wide scale, that you're going to become a smaller size person. And now, instead of trying that, we've got body positivity, right? Which is like, you can actually live an amazing life exactly at your size. And I think honestly, right, believing that women of any size consistently want to feel like an aspirational image that does not mirror them is all that we want to see. I just don't see this actually based in, in reality. I see this based in a mythology. And I think ultimately we need to understand that, like, right, we need to clothe every single body when we are not clothing 70% of the population. We are fundamentally saying, I don't care if you cannot navigate society in all the different ways that every citizen should be able to show up. I should be able to find a great outfit that makes me feel confident for an interview. I should be able to find a wedding dress if I'm going to get married. I should be able to find a prom dress if I'm going to prom. I should be able to find, like an outfit that I want to wear when I go camping. And right now what's happening, and I mean, obviously it's changing very, very rapidly, but historically the plus size customer has not been able to do any of that because that clothing has not been available. So that's kind of like where we need to start, I think.
Yeah, it's a good way to start, and there's much to do. So let's continue to have ideas to what to do. So now we are moving to Mutaneta. So why is sizing an issue for the fashion industry? And what are the implications of bad execution of the sizing in the design phase? And how technology can help us to avoid those issues?
Well, there's this rise of so-called like vanity sizing, which kind of has rendered a lot of the labels that we all know quite meaningless. And a lot of fashion brands, I mean, it's a worst kept secret, have been guilty of shifting their metrics to make shoppers feel skinnier, because I remember when I was shopping in French Connection, I was wearing a size 10 and I was like, oh my God, I'm a size 10. And then I went to Topshop and I was a 12 and a 14. I was like, oh my God, I'm a 12 and a 14. So I kind of didn't know my size anymore because the sizes were so different. And I know quite a few brands had a habit of doing that to kind of make us feel good about ourselves when we're buying it. Because as most of you know that when it comes to sizing, it's quite an emotional thing for women sometimes, you know, because we are told we have to be a certain size. And especially for myself working in fashion, you know, I might not look that big, but compared to other people in the industry, I'm a big girl, right? So it was really hard for me, for example, when I was working in the industry to be able to fit into sample sizes, because I used to work in fashion PR, you know, so, you know, I was a big girl. So I know a lot of brands started finding ways to make us feel better about ourselves by kind of shifting the sizes a little bit, which in the end kind of causes more problems than actually fixes them. You know, in that moment, I felt like I'm a size 10, but in reality, I was a 12, 14. So the good news is that with online retailers kind of salivating for technology, there's been quite a few startups bringing innovation to the forefront. And one of them is TrueFit, which some of you might have heard of. It's a Boston-based startup, and they've worked with brands like Nordstrom, Adidas, Kate Spade, and their whole entire kind of objective is to kind of help shoppers buy the correct size, basically using various types of technology. The only problem that occurs with this is that the issue of privacy, because they collect data. So even though these innovations help an industry, especially with return problems and so forth, it actually creates another problem, which is about privacy. And how comfortable are we as women to give all our information about our actual size, you know, our bra size? These are stuff that we like to kind of keep to us. My own mother doesn't know what size I am, you know, so it's the kind of innovation that is fixing a problem, but also bringing one to the forefront. And in terms of technology, I am actually quite excited about this space. I feel like a lot of startups are bringing a different kind of innovation to the table for the fashion industry. And we all know it's a very traditional industry, very not more profit than people, and kind of really wanting to change them is super hard. But with pressure from consumers for brands to actually update how they do business, I feel like innovation is going to be something that they're going to jump on and try and invest in order to keep things moving in terms of the industry. Because as we all know, you know, when you look at the current business model, it just doesn't work, you know, and we need to stop looking at sizing as an afterthought and actually have it integrated in our entire strategy, because a lot of it isn't, oh, let's do plus size, oh, let's do this, you know, and we need to actually look at it. How can we make it more inclusive, be more transparent, and use technology to do so?
Precisely. And I will move forward to Nicole, but we will go back to this argument after. So Nicole, we know how complex and complicated it is from industry perspective to produce in so many different sizes. There's little information about global standards besides the cultural differences, of course, but also there are some initiatives in order to solve this challenge. Can you give us some examples of how we can implement it on our daily production?
Well, it's a little bit of a longer answer, but I'll give you kind of an overview of what we're doing at Modern Mirror and kind of what our goal and focus has been, and what my goal has been for 15 years. From somebody that has actually suffered from body dysphoria, which I have over the years. I've had, when I was a personal shopper and a stylist about 15 years ago, my clients didn't want to go in the fitting room. They didn't, because we didn't have this body positivity. And by the way, I love the work and I love everything that's been happening in the industry and the movement, because when I grew up in the fashion industry, and when I started in the fashion industry, I started as a child model. And I can't tell you, that's, you know, back in the 90s, what I was going through. And by having a modeling agency come to you at 10 years old saying, you've lived a short career of 6-7 years, you're done. I suffered tremendously going through body dysphoria. But anyways, back to why we kind of did this in the movement was, I had clients that didn't want to go in the fitting room, and I understood it. I said, yeah, I don't feel comfortable going into the fitting room and seeing myself, because we didn't have this body positivity, because we weren't there to embrace we weren't taught to embrace ourselves in the way we look. and such. And I always said is we have to get past the sizing issue, and we need to start, because it's about how our clothing fits on us. It's how, you know, doesn't matter what size we are, as long as we've got the right outfit and it looks good and we feel good in it and it fits our bodies, that's what really, really does matter. But as we know, sizing's always been an issue. So part of this initiative was I started Modern Mirror because it was for clients to be able to go in and get 3D imaged and be able to see their exact selves. And so through 3D scanning and body motion capture and such, be able to see how clothing looks, fits, and wears on them, and their true body. Not something that was a lookalike, not something that was kind of a cartoon of them, that, you know, it was truly about them. And so that's where our whole initiatives come from. And so with saying that, and how we can look at production from this perspective is, again, it's, you know, there's some great points that have been brought up. Is this is great that we've got these different types of technologies that can 3D image people and models and all sorts of stuff and get this data. But at the end of the day, who owns that data? And through this journey, it's really been important that the clients own the data. They say who, when, where, how it gets shared, when it gets deleted, and that it's not being collected on servers or those sorts of things, so that it's being sold afterwards, because privacy is such a big issue. But then how can we take that data and share aggregated data, so not people's personal data, but how are there demographics that we can get off of that to be able to share with brands, so that they can actually start making clothing that will better fit our consumers, that can better fit all of us. And what does that look like? And then how can they do proper inventory forecasting on it? And I think with this type of movement, and we see more technologies like this and more innovations like True Fit, and with what we're doing and other companies out there that are following that same path, is eventually be really nice to see where people are able to shop right off the runway. And what I mean by shopping right off the runway is that they can virtually try on the collection off the runway, and be able to do pre-orders. And if the brand or if the client does have a good relationship with their brand and they trust their brand and they want to have things that are made to measure or customize or more personalized, they can share that data with their brands to have more pieces that might be customized better for their bodies, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of initiatives that we can do with technology, but as Manchetta said, we have to be very careful of how that data is shared, who owns that data, and how we can also empower our consumers. You know, we've even seen our modeling industry. It's been great to see there's been initiatives out there, and Ziget was one of the companies that started this. Where they were taking imagery of people of all different sizes, shapes, you name it, and then you could, on the site, pick a model that would best represent your body. Well, my thing is I love that, and that's been such an amazing initiative, but let's take it the next step further and unlock the next level of personalization, where you're actually seeing yourself, where you're the model, you feel empowered and can see how that clothing is going to wear on you. And you know, we've, on one last note on this, we've seen with the fashion industry, you know, we've gone from the 90s, 80s, 90s, those sorts of things with the way we used to cast models, to 25 years later, what we're doing now. And we're seeing such a diverse, it's beautiful, that the amount of diversity when it comes to our modeling industry. What I actually now get a little bit worried about with some of these initiatives when it comes to things like CGI models, where it's not based off an actual person. Are we taking a few steps back on that? Are we creating CGI models that properly reflect our people of today? So it's just a couple of things to think about, because we just did a digital modeling event at our office, where models came in during New York Fashion Week to be 3D imaged. And it was Digital Fashion Week New York that said, you know, we want to do a virtual runway, but there wasn't enough CGI models out there of diverse sizes that we'd actually want to use in our digital fashion show. So it was an eye-opener of how important these taking the next steps and initiatives are. Sorry, I went down several rabbit holes there, but hopefully that answered the question.
Can I just add to what Nicole was saying? Because I know that one of the big problems with innovation and technology in general, it can kind of breed more problems. And when you're saying about the idea of these models that are kind of CGI and not really real, might be created and look really perfect, which is what we're trying to move away from.
Exactly.
I think it's the responsibility of modeling agencies to actually use this technology to create a database of the models that they already have, instead of having them on a physical books that we're all used to in the fashion industry, actually create digital versions of them. So if you require a digital model, you can get Naomi as Naomi, you can get Naomi as a digital version of herself. So that kind of takes away takes away all the work that's been done to introduce all these models,
And you know what, the other thing on that piece of it from a digital modeling perspective is, as the fashion industry is evolving, as it's evolving through the metaverse and innovations and such, what's happening to our modeling industry and our models who have been at the forefront of this. And the fashion brands have depended so much on them when it comes to marketing or fit models or runway models, you name it. How is just CGI models affecting that, and how can we help evolve their careers when it comes to the metaverse, and how do they have a role, and how does that work, and is there a way where they can continue to make royalties or license their 3D digital selves, but it's themselves, and it's the authentic version of themselves. And so
I think that is possible. And I think it tells you that when it comes to technology, we're always focusing a lot on retail. Like retail needs to adopt, retail needs to evolve. There's other aspects of the fashion industry that should also be adopting various types of innovations in order to move forward with the industry. And the modeling agencies, they need to also adopt innovation that works for them and keeps their models in work. I never really viewed it as a replacement. People are always like, oh my God, they're creating these virtual influencers that don't really exist, taking away jobs of models. No, they're not actually, because if the industry really wants to move forward, they can basically adopt this technology and keep their their models in business by creating versions of themselves that exist digitally.
Exactly, which is where we're keeping that body positivity and that diversity that we've been striving for so many years, right? And that's not, and we're not replacing that with CGI models that are, maybe don't reflect that. So it is, yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you. Sorry, I don't know how I took us down digital modeling. That's not what you wanted us to answer.
No, but this is how it works, and it's very, very good to have all these paths we can get in. But just to remember the audience, you can send your questions to the Q&A at last 15 minutes. So you have until the last 20 minutes to do that. So please, using the Q&A tool or the chat, go just do it. Leslie, our co-founder of the Digital Fashion Group, is here with us in the audience as well. Do you have something to ask for the ladies?
Hi. Oh, good to join you. And yeah, I was sending messages to Livia. Oh, that's such a good point. Nicole, that was a really amazing point that you brought up about CGI models, of course, and how fashion and gaming are coming together, and how the whole gaming area is influencing the way that we're looking at fashion. So I think that's a super interesting part of it. And so often I'm not a gamer, I'm really not interested in gaming, but I've been looking at gaming more because it's so important just now. And when you look at the gaming, you think these are just the worst representations of bodies possible. It's like porn star models, both the men and the women. It's just unbelievable. And if we're developing fashion designers working in this area, then it really is a step backwards, isn't it, on how we see these bodies. And when I've spoken to people about this, and they said, oh, but it's like fantasy, it's like, you can be whoever you want to be and dress however you want to dress, and then it's like adding another layer to it, isn't it? It's like, you can be whoever you want to be. Okay, I want to look like a porn star. I want to look like a cliche of a woman or a man. It really is going down the wrong way.
If I can look whatever I want, why do I decide to look like a standard model of women, or of a woman, of a man?
Yeah.
This is the question that I truly believe we should be doing to the designers to help us in this field. How can we make like, for instance, if I want to be an ogre, of course I can be an ogre, but I want to be a well-dressed ogre. I deserve to be a well-dressed ogre. And this means that we need to think about the design. It's not about sizing, but it's how the fitting the materials when you're creating digital, how they can fit in different sizes and shapes, and not to just simulate a perfect or a standardized world.
And also another thing that I think is so important in the sizing debate is about sustainability, obviously, because so many garments are being returned, so many people are buying them on the internet, and they're not fitting and they're returning them, and many companies are just wasting them because they're being returned and they're not reconditioning them, and they're just chucking them out, you know. And I think that's a huge area that better fitting can certainly influence a big waste in the industry. And Nicole, is there anything that you can share in this area about,
well,
size?
And just to add on to that, I was going to say, I'm trying to remember the statistics, but it is, I believe it's over 35-40% of people have admitted that they will purchase the same style of garment. They'll purchase three different sizes in that same style of garment, in order, knowing they're going to return 2 out of 3 or 3 out of the 4 garments, knowing that that's going to be returned. So right then and there, from a sustainability standpoint, what the brands aren't realizing as well is what are those returns? What is that carbon footprint and that pollution as well, with the extra packaging, the extra waste, and the transportation back and forth, and how many hands does that have to go through with all those returns? Because the sizing is so off, and people can't be confident enough to go into a brand, as we've said before, because of anti-sizing, because of everything else, we don't know what size we are. Even in one store, we could be multiple different sizes depending on the way something is cut and fit. So with this is part of using innovations, for example, like True Fit. That really has helped reduce these returns and exchanges. So, you know, at Modern Mirror, what we're focused on is just that next level of, okay, how can you see it, how it wears and how it looks and how it fits? That's what's important. The visual for us is for the visual standpoint of it, to help reduce those returns and exchanges. Because, you know, even I think the statistics came out, what was it? Companies like Revolve is, I love Revolve. It's a great online site. And I think in 2019, even prior to the pandemic, their numbers came out and they had made revenues of over 450 million, but their losses were over 500 due to returns and exchanges. What are we doing, and how is that also adding to the pollution? Not just the mass production of clothing, because we don't have because designers and brands don't really have a clear, they try to better forecast, and as Virgie was saying too, is they're trying to better forecast and really understand what the consumers are wanting, and better understand you know, is what that sizing looks like. But not everyone is doing that. So we're also, at times, a lot of the fashion brands are just producing garments that may be ill-fitting or not fitting our population accurately. So how can data help them with that? And there's a lot of data out there, but are they is it the right data, and are they paying attention to that data is the biggest thing, and how are they implementing that data from a strategy perspective? So
I mean, I was hoping to add that, like, one of the biggest things that I hear from plus size customers is, and obviously the pandemic with that as the background, right, is that maybe the company is making the clothes, but if they have a brick and mortar store, they're not carrying those extended sizes in the store. So the plus size customer would love to be able to go into a store, you know, pull out like all the different potential sizes they might be, and leave with one garment. And I think, and you know, I just speaking from the plus side of this conversation, I think about it. So plus size women make anywhere between $9,000 and $19,000 less per year than her straight size counterpart. And I just want to say, like, a lot of times this cycle of the person who's buying 3 sizes because they can't, obviously not all brands have brick and mortar, and I think we're transitioning really as a culture around that. But like, there's no reason that should happen with Target.com. There's no reason that should happen with Old Navy. There's no reason that these certain brands that have brick and mortars. And I just sort of think about how it's like the cycle of not only the impact sustainability wise, but when we're looking at that income gap, what that kind of cycle of purchasing, what that does to a consumer. I'm just sort of thinking about, from that perspective, having the actual sizes of 70% potentially of the consumer base, if you have a brick and mortar, like, could be part of a solve in that,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to throw a statistic that really stuck in my head when I first read it. A company called Precise said that there's 2% of online fashion shoppers are the only ones that actually find those perfectly sized garments. And I was thinking, obviously for that shop online, only 2% get the perfectly sized garment. And it was a number that really shocked me, because you would think maybe 30, 40%, but 2%. And that kind of tells you how important it is, for the industry to really look at sizing solutions and try and figure out which startups to collaborate with. Because I understand, coming from somebody who writes about fashion and tech, I get it that the industry has no clue about innovation. It's something that's very new, very scary to them. Hence, and this is where collaborations come into play. Why not collaborate with one of the startups that are bringing these solutions to the table and figure out how you can kind of create, a much more better, I guess, numbers than the 2% that I read, And also, I feel sometimes like the power should not only be left to the retailers.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for consumers to take that power back and create, imagine creating your own avatar through an app with your exact measurements that you have access to, not the retailer, you have access to. So when you're shopping online, you use that app to find clothes that are as close to your size as possible. So that takes away the retailer having your information, you have it. So imagine having that kind of standardized, way of shopping where you can just kind of, I'm going to use this app and it's going to find the perfect clothes for me at this store, And I think that takes away that fear of, privacy and data and giving your information to brands, because at the moment, a lot of consumers don't trust brands,
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, with their greenwashing and this and that, and, they're kind of trying to earn back our trust,
It is.
And with innovation, why not, as us consumers, why don't we learn about it? Why don't we take the power back and kind of be able to kind of create this kind of, I guess, avatar or something with our sizes in it, and then we can just use that to shop.
I so love that you said that, because it's interesting, just going back to the modeling perspective, because we just did this a few weeks ago. And so when the models came in, they were telling me horror stories right now of, I won't say what brands, but certain brands that might have access to scanners and those sorts of things. They were trying to get them through their scanning devices to keep that data. The brands, some of these models had no clue what they were. The modeling agencies don't know how to write contracts based on this new innovation. And they're like, hey, who owns the data? So when they came to us and we scanned them, I said, there's all your data. They're like, oh, and where are you using it? I said, no, here's the terms, conditions. We can't use it. We're not allowed to look at it. We're not allowed to use it. We're not allowed to experiment. We're not allowed to aggregate the data. We can't do anything with it unless you give that permission. And they're like, these are our files. I'm like, yeah, go do what you want with them. Like, if you want to go take them to somebody else to get them enhanced, or if you want to do different things, if you want to get it, you want to take this data and give it to a brand now, you guys go and do that and figure out how you're going to license that to them. And they're like, well, we don't know how, can you help us? And I was like, okay, I'll help you with it. But it is, it's exactly what you said, is it's about not that brand owning it. The only way the brand gets to see it is if you want to give it to them, if that makes sense. They cannot be owning this data. And so when we do talk to brands and they're like, so who owns the data? And I'm like, you might have the system, but you don't own it. I said, that's why you only lease the systems from us, because we will hold and protect that data for the client, but it's that client that stepped in that owns that data, you don't. And for them to get that wrapped around their minds as well as going, oh, and I said, but if you build enough trust with your client, you might be lucky enough that they share it with you. But again,
this changed completely the mindset of fashion. Since the Industrial Revolution, the brands and the factories owned it, everything, like the sizing, the colors. This is from the top from to us. And now we are seeing a completely change of it, where the consumer and we are co-creators in this space. And the future is bright in these terms, but brands are not ready. Factories are not ready to deal with that. So for what all the three of you are talking, we are discussing something that is even bigger than the sizing issue. We're talking about how complicated it is for the brands or for the factories and for the ones who are making our clothing, realize that we own our bodies and our sizes and our ideas, and how someone is saying maybe here on chat, the idea of educating better the consumer to realize their own bodies. So this again, should we go for a co-creator kind of fashion for now on? What do you think about that?
I say yay, definitely. I said because it's unfortunate that everyone in the fashion industry they don't have the tools that they need in order to do everything themselves. It makes sense that you kind of work with somebody with kind of the knowledge and the information that you need in order to go forward. So for me, kind of working, co-creating with designers, let's say work with an engineer, or you've got like Stella McCartney, who was working with, with scientists from that company in New York, whose name just completely disappears out of my head. They work together, and they're not fashion people, but they're problem solvers. So they are coming up with ideas to help the industry. And a lot of the solutions, especially from a tech perspective, are coming from outside the industry. People who are economists, people who are scientists, they're the ones that are coming up with these ideas that, hey guys, how about you do it like this? How about you introduce that? Even some of it, like what Leslie mentioned, is coming from the gaming industry. The gaming industry is kind of starting to play a really big role in helping the fashion industry also view how they do business a little differently. So kind of co-creation, collaboration, partnership, whatever you want to call it, is definitely the way forward.
Exactly. And Virgie, you were talking exactly on our chat, answering to Erica about the consumer should be honest with their measurements. But it's hard for the consumer to realize that, because sometimes we have even body disorders and we don't see ourselves in that size because we need to fit in those sizes. And maybe culturally speaking, they're not what we feel about it. So this should begin with us as well as consumers, like realizing our body positivism.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because we're having this conversation and it's so important. And I mean, I think that what I'm always aware of is that this is all happening in a context of fat phobia, of diet culture, of disordered eating, right? Like, we live in a culture that promotes us to have an incorrect image of ourselves, to be ashamed. Like, literally, I mean, I was just writing an essay about how for years I used to cut the tags out of my own clothing because I couldn't witness my own size, like my own body, and I think, what Erica was kind of pointing out, there's a few things I think Erica is talking about, but I think specifically, right, like if a customer can't face that, like, this is the size of their waist, this is the size of their bust, like if they can't handle that and they're modifying those numbers, perhaps even subconsciously, or they're spiraling when they have to do it, we're talking about, I think it's important to say, right, like there are some consumers who just want to, are at that point where they can take the measurement, they just want the garment to fit. But we're talking about an issue that is specifically gendered, like when we're talking about body image and disordered eating and all of this, women are the disproportionate victims of this, the disproportionate targets of advertising and, all these kinds of, and the diet industry, et cetera. So I think it's so important that, like, right, I think we're already seeing this in fashion where the culture is shifting around these issues and the demand from brands is changing. The demand from representation and models is changing. So I think we're already on that path. But it is so important, right? Like we have to recognize that we're doing this work within a context where there are plenty of consumers who literally cannot face their own bodies. And like, I don't quite, there's no fantastic, easy solution for this. It really just takes years. And I think obviously if the brand is taking a stand on like, we have this neutral belief about body. We're not going to consistently edit our model so that you feel triggered when you see our product. We're actually going to present people who represent the bodies that most people have, or that a diversity of people have, right? I think there are things the brand can do to make it feel more comfortable to be honest in those moments. But I do think this is a cultural issue, as much as it is a fashion issue.
I completely agree with what Virgie's saying. We actually, before the pandemic, we had done a pop-up for Maria Graf-Vogel in London, and she'd invited 50 of her top clientele, elite clientele. The age ranges were between 18 and up to 70, in their early 70s. Mostly, of course, predominantly women were there. This was a 2-hour event where we had people get 3D imaged, just as a trial, little pop-up. And it was overwhelming that a 2-hour event turned into a 10-day event, where I had to keep our team and everybody there because people want to come in for private appointments just to be 3D imaged. Now, there was something that was very interesting that happened, because a lot of people keep saying to me, well, it was probably a lot of millennials that want to be imaged. And I said, no, actually, the age range was minimum 35 up to 55-year-olds who the women, that segment, actually really were interested in being 3D body imaged. And one of the women that came in to come and see us when we were there, Maria had told me, listen, she doesn't like going into the fitting room. She doesn't feel, it's very uncomfortable for her. There's an issue with shopping. So she said, we're going to have to see how she feels getting into this. Even though she's booked the appointment to come in to be 3D image, we have to see how she's going to feel. So I kicked everybody out, even myself. I only let two of my team members, one lovely ladies, be there. I came back and the woman looked at me and thanked me. And she said, that was so less intimidating. And I looked at her and said, really? Because 42 cameras just went off on you. And I said, you didn't find that intimidating? You said, Nicole, it happened in less than a second. I didn't have to see it. I didn't have to look. I didn't have to keep trying on all these different sizing and think about the sizing. Because after I stepped out, I had recommended just the imagery of the garments just started appearing. And if I want to go up a size, I did. If I want to go down a size, but I wasn't fixated on the size anymore. It was, do I want it to be looser fitting or tighter fitting, or how do I want it to fit my body? Because that is what is and now I'm seeing the garment on my body. And she said that is what she really appreciated, and what was empowering to her to start to accept her body and stop fixating on what that number was, is that she could just see it. And it was about, do you want it looser or do you want it tighter? How do you want it to fit? And she didn't have to go and start selecting and picking sizes, if that makes sense. So that was one of those stories where it gave me goosebumps, and I went, okay, are we hopefully going in the right direction here then, for people accepting themselves on the way they are and not fixating on what's my measurements. So
you know what it is? I think it's ingrained in women, especially coming from the fashion industry. There's numbers that we just don't give. Our age, our weight, and our clothes size. We just do not do it. Someone asked me, you lie, right? But I feel with what's going on with the body positive movement is that it's slowly chipping away at that belief. It's not going to happen. I mean, I'm not going to throw my numbers at you guys tonight. It's not happening. But, these type of, images that I'm seeing on Instagram and people saying, be who you are, be confident, are slowly chipping away at what was built up in my 20s, so I don't think it's something like saying, just tell somebody. I think it's something like saying, like, what are you comfortable with? And let's find a way of making you comfortable with your body size, with how you look. Because obviously, as you get older, your body changes. You need to accept that. You need to be okay with that. And I think the technology that is out there right now will help women become more comfortable with their bodies, like what Nicole was saying, where you kind of realize it's not such a big deal after all, but it takes time,
It's just,
well, and I'm thinking, sorry.
I'm just gonna say, just to end that, it's just like how we've been taught not to look at the weight on the scale, because that doesn't mean anything, and it's taken us years, and we're still, I know many of us fixated on that, but it took me years not to focus, and now it's still subconsciously back there once in a while. But with all of this body positivity and the movements and such that have been happening, I'm actually going, I don't really care what that says on there, because it's about how I feel and how my clothing feels on me and I feel empowered. And it's, so all of that work that everyone's been doing has been absolutely brilliant, because like you said, it's starting to chip away, and I think it's going to take time, but I think we're starting to get there. So
Virgie, please.
Oh yeah, I was looking at what Helen wrote about being happy with their size, but when I put in the measurements and created an avatar, it just looked so big, and I wasn't happy with the virtual me. I think this gets into the complexity of this issue, which I think is so powerful, right? Like you can be fine with your day-to-day body, and then right, essentially that disconnect between I'm fine with my body, but I'm having a feeling about my avatar is fully about the visual processing center. It's literally because we don't see enough big people. It's because 99% of the time we see the 1% body. And so I think what's interesting is like that these little disconnects where it's like, oh my goodness, like I can have actually quite high levels of body satisfaction, and yet my visual processing center is telling me error when I see a rendering of my own body. And that's about representation 100%.
See, Virgie, you hit the nail on the head there. That is the other side of the coin of the sizing innovation. Yes, it gives us our true size, woohoo, but do I want to see my true size? Do I really want to see the visual version of me? And some women are not ready for that. And I'm one of those women to a degree. I'm all about technology and I love it, but do I want to see a little version of me that actually shows me all my baby weight and, my thighs have got a little bigger? Maybe not yet, but doesn't mean I don't champion the technology. It just means that it takes time for certain people to adopt it and to be okay with it, And I think once you realize that it's fine and it's okay, then I think most women will be very comfortable with it. It just takes time.
If every woman discover how fashion actually happens, a photo shooting, what is actually behind it, even the skinny models have clips behind them to the fit, to the perfect fitting. So it's in all the steps, it's not true, absolutely not true. And if everyone understood that, maybe we should be able to, not understood, just realize that. Maybe we should be able to accept ourselves better and accept the others as well, because there is something about social media that makes us to judge the others as well. And this is a main issue. And the same way we are developing this amazing body positivism, we have on social media the opposite in some channels, and still forcing ourselves to see those perfect models with perfect skin and Photoshop it as hell. And I think it's, as we were saying, there's no just one way out. I think there's several paths to go through and different ways of doing that. So just to wrap up, we have 10 minutes. I would like to ask you one last question to all of you. So we understand that having a diverse sizing portfolio changed the fashion industry, the production structure, but also we can suggest a change in business models. So from the business side, how can we innovate on that? Thinking on on-demand services, rentals, subscription models. What are these business models and of the future that could contribute to solving the sizing issue or even improve?
I'll start. I think the one that's really kind of pushing forward is on-demand. The on-demand business model, it not only does it tackle the waste problem in terms of creating products that doesn't get sold or people don't want, but actually creating products that people have actually pre-bought already and it's been sent to them. And I think this model will also help in terms of sizing as well, because I know quite a few brands are looking at using sizing technology when creating these kind of limited type collections in order to give that extra service and experience to the buyer. So instead of, say you're buying this, let's say this jumper, and you can use that type of technology to make sure the jumper fits right. Are you a medium? Are you a large? Are you not a medium or large? You just kind of fit into your body. So I kind of know there's a few startup brands that I love that are kind of not only doing on demand from sustainability perspective, they're also looking at using sizing technology to help someone feel like not only am I ordering and having to wait for this, but it's going to fit. It's going to be something that will arrive and I'll put it on. I'm like, yeah, that fits. And it's what you need if you're going to do the on-demand business model. You need to make sure it fits, because we're waiting 3 weeks for this product. And if it doesn't fit us, and then we have to send it back after waiting 3 weeks, it's going to be a problem. So I know a lot of startups who are adopting this way of doing business are really looking into making sure they've got sizing solutions in place.
Nicole, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. It's very similar. Some of the things that we've actually been asked about from brands is we've got one of our platforms, our back-end system, where we work between our team and also a brand is called the Virtual Atelier. They're asking, and that's really where you can see digital samples being created and they can go, yay, nay, yes, I approve this, I don't. We've been asked to take that Virtual Atelier and create a client perspective between the brand and the client, where if the client wants to share their 3D body scan data, they can with the brand, and the brand can then co-create with them garments, if that makes sense. So they can go, okay, rather than having them come in for a bunch of fittings, whether it's for a dress or whether it's for a bridal or whether it's for suiting, whatever it might be, versus having them come in and go through that process. They're trying to do things where they look at doing it online. So they can say, here's the digital. Here, we create this digital pattern. Here it is so far. What do you think of these colors? Oh, you don't like this. You don't like the style. Oh, we can adjust the fitting. What do you want to see? And they can go back and forth. So that's something that is they're looking at exploring. So again, we get to the more personalization of one, designing their garments, to making sure that they fit, and three, the sustainability aspect of we don't have to go make it until it's been signed off by the client, if that makes sense. So it's just helping with fittings and such. So we've seen that we've been asked for that perspective from smaller brands and designers and such. So,
and just to add what Nicole said, data is another way that I feel brands are missing out. They have all this information on who their customer is, and they don't know how to use it, or they don't use it. So what Virgie was saying was like walking into a store as a bigger woman, walking in there and only seeing size 6s. You walk back 2 weeks later, more size 6s, but never your own size. So if that store was to use its data correctly, it would be able to know what kind of customer walks into that store. You know, is it more customers that are size 14s that come and shop with us, or is it more customers that are more size 6s? And then knowing this information, they can stock products that actually will sell, because of the fact that they are selling to the customers that they have an idea that come through the door. And I know, like when you look at high street brands like Zara, they use a lot of that data in order to create their designs, in order to kind of make sure that the collection that they have in Paris is, you know, is what the Parisians like to wear versus the collections they have in Amsterdam. And they like to make sure that, you know, the amount of products that they have actually sell, as opposed to having a lot of stock kept behind, because they're not really kind of working with who their consumer is in that particular store, in that particular city, in that particular country. So data plays a really big role. And I feel like a lot of retailers just need to know how to use that and interpret it for good.
And talking about data, there's a question from Andy: where to get reliable size charts that can be used as a basis for digital biometric sizing? Do you know where to find?
I mean, I don't know if they're, personally, I don't know, but if I was, you know, looking for that, I would start Googling the startups that are doing kind of this innovation and try and figure out whether I can work with them, or I can kind of get more information from them, and to see, you know, how I can work on my size. Because what we're trying to do is get rid of that standard size, that small, medium, and large. We need to get rid of that, because, you know, sometimes I'm a medium, sometimes I'm a large, you know, very rarely I'm a small. But, you know, we need to get rid of that. So instead of trying to find out what that is, try looking at where we're going in terms of innovation, and what startups are bringing this innovation to the table, so you can get a correct size for yourself, as opposed to deciding, you know, whether you're medium, large, or small.
Precisely.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, and another question is from Katy. What are the leading brands you think are pioneering on-demand model?
Zalando, which is an online store, is really kind of pushing the boundaries with adopting various types of technology. And what's key here is experimentation. These brands are experimenting and figuring out what works for their customers. Because when it comes to technology in general, you know, you should always look at the customer, not look at your bottom line or how much money you can make. Look at what your customer requires and needs, and you can never go wrong. So if you're looking at a brand or company that is doing this, I would recommend checking out Zalando.
Great. So we have 2 minutes. I would like to ask last words from Nicole, from Janetta, and from Virgie, please.
I've been talking a lot, so I'll let one of you ladies start.
So last words, just to kind of summarize. Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on this panel with these amazing, incredible ladies, because I love their insight and everything that they bring. And it is, we do have a massive issue still when it comes to sizing and when it comes to body positivity and such. There's been amazing work that's been done. We are moving in that direction. And as we've all said, is brands really need to start looking at innovation, start looking at, just to summarize, really, Manjit said it really all is, I'm just summarizing exactly what she said, because that's what I'm taking away from this as well, is they need to also start looking at how to utilize that data, how they can, and better be, they have to be embracing this movement as well. Just like we are, the consumers are, they need to start embracing this movement. And like we said, we start to see that in the modeling industry and that being embraced, but there's more that they can do both in store as well as online. And it's an exciting time right now. So I just, both from a body positivity, but also from a sustainability aspect. So it's great to see these type of brands, designers, and different types of innovations coming together to collaborate and try to make a better experience for the consumer, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. So
yeah, I mean, I was thinking in response to the question about business, as I was sort of going to be unorthodox and sidestep it a little bit and say that, I think the best business move is actually to start with checking your bias at the leadership level, and understanding that, body diversity is not a problem to solve, it's an opportunity to serve. And so, I think, like, for me, I think this conversation really illuminated, and some of the comments really said, like, to make these changes in only a vacuum without actually looking at, like, how do I see my own body as the CEO? How do I feel about my own measurements, right? Like, and maybe bringing in someone or doing some of that work, so that, because honestly, it's that trickle down effect. Like, if you still have internalized ideas about the right body and the wrong body, it's really difficult to make any decisions just from that point forward going down that are not going to reflect that. It kind of ends up showing up in almost like the DNA of what's being created. So that's sort of like my best business advice. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Virgie. Go on, Jonathan.
I would like to speak to the brands who are listening. Basically, new sizing technology offers you actionable intel. And this is super important, these words, actionable intel, because I know that a lot of the industry is super scared to invest in innovation. They dip their toe slightly and they dip it straight out. So we need the industry to not look at sizing technology as an add-on, as an afterthought, as something that they're going to add because it's jazzy and it's funny and it's trending right now. Actually put it as part of their entire strategy of how they're going to appeal to the customers and keep the customers that they do have. So, whether you experiment on small scale or you experiment on a big scale, invest in these startups, work with these startups, find a way of making this the norm rather than be something that is, that is spoken and talked about, but nothing's ever done. Because in the end, when it comes to innovation, I always say that it's a marathon. It's not like a sprint, so I don't expect you to put loads of money into it, but I do expect you to educate yourself and take it to the next level.
That's a perfect way of finishing our webinar, an amazing session. I'm so sad to have to end this, but this conversation is absolutely not over. You can join our Academy platform to continue the talk and in our debate forum. And in a few days, you can watch the replay of the webinar in our webinar library. So please, and also feel free to reach us on social media anytime. If you have any questions that they were not answered by the panelists, send us an email or inbox, and we will forward to the panelists, okay? Our email is digital@digitalfashiongroup.academy. So thank you so much. Thank you, Janetta. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Virgie. It was a pleasure. And all this conversation will also be a Fashion United article in a few weeks. So I hope you all be reading there too. And please contribute to the discussion. We have to continue to talk about sizing. Thank you so much.